Hey friends, my name's Georgie. I'm a breathwork and performance coach helping people gain core confidence through the power of the breath. The warmest of welcomes to the Just Breathe podcast. Now, you can probably tell I am suffering with a bit of a cold at the moment, as is the rest of the United Kingdom. It seems we're definitely experiencing a change in weather, and it has caused everybody's noses to get a little bit stuffy, but we carry on. Of course, we are British, we keep calm and carry on, right? So I'm really excited to bring you today's episode. I'll be chatting to fellow Oxygen Advantage Master Instructor Anastasis Tzanis. Anastasis went from being a banker to a yoga and nutritional therapist in 2009, where he developed a wellness protocol combining innovative yoga modalities with the fundamentals of breathwork. He's now dedicated his life to understanding the link between mind and body and has been rated one of the top yoga teachers in London by About Time magazine in 2017. I got chatting to Anastasis about the link between the more functional breathing method of the Oxygen Advantage and the ancient art of pranayama, as seen in many yoga classes, and something that has been practiced for hundreds of thousands of years. And this is the thing with breathwork. None of this stuff is new. This stuff has lived for millennia, and it's for a good reason, because of course breath is the foundation of all health. Anastasis shares his story of how he found the Oxygen Advantage and the impact it had on his yoga teachings. It was a really wonderful and powerful conversation, and if you are a yoga teacher, make sure you are jumping on Anastasis' course with Patrick McEwen and the Oxygen Advantage. I think the first one is in November. The link to gain more information will be in the show notes, so please do go check it out. You do not want to miss it. It is fundamental for any yoga teacher to learn this stuff. A little bit of housekeeping. If you haven't already, don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the Just Breathe podcast. Let's keep on building that strong breathing community. The more people becoming empowered and inspired by the breath, the better. All right, let's jump right into today's powerful conversation. I really hope you enjoy it. And I definitely felt like grabbing my mat and jumping into a good old vinyasa flow right after having my conversation with Anastasis. This is episode 49 of Just Breathe with Anastasis Tzanis. Hey Anastasis, how's it going?
Hi Georgina, how are you?
Yeah, really good, thank you. I mean, definitely feeling the change in weather. The seasons are shifting, and starting to feel that snuggly coziness, and yeah, still doing my morning yoga, but doing it in the big snuggly jumper now.
Excellent. Yeah, it's a great time of the year. I love it.
Yeah, I love autumn too. But thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's always such an honor to have a fellow Oxygen Advantage instructor, but particularly a master instructor is always wonderful. And you've done so many wonderful things for the Oxygen Advantage in terms of connecting yoga and the Oxygen Advantage method, which just is functional breathing, I suppose.
Correct. Yeah, that's part of that's my job. I'm a yoga teacher, so it happened naturally. And I'm sure as you are in the process of becoming a yoga teacher and you're a master instructor as well, you will be creating new material and you will be bringing your knowledge and expertise into the Oxygen Advantage community.
Yeah, I hope so. And I love that. I say this every time I speak to an instructor. I just love that it's such a family, that everyone is so there for each other in the Oxygen Advantage community. It's awesome. And yoga obviously means to unite, and so it couldn't be more appropriate in terms of the way the Oxygen Advantage is. But how did you find the Oxygen Advantage anyway? How did it come into your being?
Yeah. So I was having a friend visiting London in order to attend an Oxygen Advantage workshop. He's a long-standing friend of mine, and he encouraged me to come along. I had never heard of Patrick, and as I said, he is a very good friend of mine. So at the time when I went to this 3 days workshop, which is one a lot of instructors attended initially. I found the answer to many of the questions that I had for many, many years. And that got me hooked. I mean, it was literally within the first 3 hours of the first day that I knew more than I ever thought I would come to know. That was it.
Yeah, I had a similar experience actually, where I was almost angry is the wrong word, but I was almost irritated that I didn't know this before, because I was like, so many things could have been so much simpler if I'd have just known these things. That blows a lot of my clients' minds as well, and the people I teach. It's so simple, so much so that do you find this, that people don't believe you that it's that powerful because it's so simple?
100%. Yeah, absolutely. So how did you get into? How did you find the Oxygen Advantage?
For me, actually, it was the beginning of the pandemic, and life, as for many people, for me, just stopped. I was in the performing industry, I was acting, and everything just stopped. I went from going to a million miles an hour to nothing. And it was a huge awakening for me, because it was like, okay, if I'm not an actress, if I don't identify with all these different things, this doing, if I just have to be, then who the hell am I? And all I was left with was the breath. And I picked up the Oxygen Advantage, and the same, I was just hooked. And I was really into running, and I still am, and yoga, and started just nasal breathing, started practicing the exercises, and just experienced the best sleep of my life, better energy, any digestive issues I had just resolved. I just felt so much clearer, and there was a global pandemic going on, and yet I felt very grounded, very grateful, and very in balance. And I was like, wow, in this time where everything feels so unstable, right at the beginning of the pandemic, when it really didn't know how long it was going to go on for, etc., I was like, if I can feel in flow in these circumstances, then when things are going well, how on earth am I going to feel? So I felt a huge calling to spread the message to as many people as I possibly could.
Fantastic. Yeah. Excellent.
Yeah, for sure.
So, and yes, you're right, that the message is very simple, and a lot of people will be surprised by how simple it is, and they will almost discard it as something that can potentially help them long term, or help them with problems that they have been dealing with for a lifetime.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of people discard yoga too, though. I do find that as well, as something that actually is just slow, it's relaxing. Actually, you put yourself in a vinyasa flow class or an Ashtanga class, yoga's freaking hard.
Yeah.
It takes so much strength. And, I know you'll speak about this, but like the breath, actually, and almost like ballerinas, I come from the performing world, those that are the strongest make everything look the most effortless. Same in yoga.
100%. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, bodily strength, almost mental strength as well, is shown by that effortlessness of being. No need to force or try, because you just are. And there's something beautiful about that. So how long have you been teaching yoga? It's been a long time, right?
It's coming probably, in 2012. So it's coming close to 10 years now.
Gosh, oh my goodness. Yeah. And what sort of connected you with yoga in the first place? Were you always like a mover? You were always into fitness?
No, not really. Mover is not my middle name. Yeah, I was in banking. I was like, I was a currency derivatives trader. And I had a little bit of an unfortunate circumstance with my health that made me look after my diet a little bit more. And then this triggered a knock-on effect and a series of events. And in the process of making myself healthier and healthier, I decided that I want to pick up yoga. So that was in, I think, January of 2009. And I immersed myself in it. That was it. So
yeah. Amazing. And it really helped you on your sort of healing journey to getting better and getting over that.
Absolutely. I mean, by the time I started yoga, I was already fine. I had already, dealt with. It was not like I was having like many deadly disease. I had put on weight, but it was like it was a little bit of an awkward situation altogether at the time, and so I had lost the extra weight that I had, but I wanted to take it a step further. And then I decided to study nutritional therapy, which I did. And at the same time, I started yoga. And in the process, I, of course, a lot of the things that you mentioned about improving my relationship with my body, understanding my body more. I think that's something that yoga is fantastic at helping people. And I think also breathing better. I think I usually say when I teach, and I know that there are yoga practitioners or yoga teachers in the audience, I say that you are breath workers, whether you see yourself as one or not. Yeah. I think a lot of people have healed themselves from asthma, from other respiratory conditions, where they just have become better breathers by doing yoga. Mm-hmm. If only they knew all the things that Patrick is teaching, and I think the effect would be amplified. And I think 100%. Instead of gaining 10, they would gain 100 out of the same amount of practice.
Absolutely. And, it's incredible in terms of, I call the breath, and I love the breath and I'm passionate about it because I think it's really the only constant that truly stays with us in our lives. I even said to someone today, you can't do yoga for 24 hours a day. You can't eat for 24 hours a day. You can't drink for all the time. The only thing that is truly, truly constant and happening 24/7 is the fact that you are breathing. And so why not start there? That if you want to optimize something that you do incrementally, start with what is constant. And I think you're completely right that yoga teachers, whether they include pranayama, which for anyone listening that doesn't know is a sort of yogic breathing technique, very ancient practices that actually, a lot of the Western breathing practices we see today are derived from pranayama. This is nothing new, this stuff that both me and Anastasis are teaching. It's derived from ancient wisdom. I think you're right that all yoga teachers are breath workers, whether they know it or not. To move is to move with the breath. I mean, try do an hour yoga class without breathing. It's impossible.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. So I know I watched your brilliant talk in terms of when you did a talk for the master instructors with yoga and the oxygen advantage. And you talked about the crossover between the pranayamic techniques and Patrick's method as well of breathing less, breathing light, slow and low. Could you talk a little bit about that now as well and just expand for people listening, but maybe that aren't as familiar with pranayama in terms of if they go to a yoga class and experience a breathing technique or are told to say, breathe into your belly, all of these things we hear, or, breathe deeply, just expanding in a yogic sense, what that actually means.
Sure. So, because you touched on a couple of different things, I will try to answer them, but please let me know if you want us to expand on any of them.
Thank you.
So, I think that, and I'll take a step back before answering directly your questions, that I think there is a tendency for people to get stuck to methods and as opposed to keeping an eye on principles. And the problem when we look at methods is that we can get attached to a guru, or we can get attached to a system. But the message that the guru wanted to communicate, or the message or the purpose that the system wanted to communicate, can very easily get lost. But instead, if we look at the principle, if we look at why we are doing these things, what are we trying to achieve through a pranayama breathing exercise? What are we trying to achieve with oxygen advantage exercises and so on? We may find, I think, a lot of the times that there is much more overlap. Maybe people can relate to religion. I mean, I'm not religious myself, but a lot of religious people, they would say that, maybe I'm Christian and someone else is follows Islam, but we both believe in a God, we both believe in a creator. So it's a little bit of that. And I think that it's if a lot of people would try to follow the breathing practices, but the issue with it is that there is not one source. So there are like different yogic practices that develop in Tibet and others in India, and there are of course different schools of yoga, and then of course, are we always accessing the initial source? Because obviously the original guru is probably dead a long time ago.
Yeah.
With this in mind, I think that if we look at the most pranayama exercises, because there are many different ones and different ones try to achieve different things. If we look at the majority of them, we would see that they try to promote slow breathing, light breathing, and they try to introduce a rhythm into the breath. I would probably argue that, you know, there are only a handful of breathing techniques that they don't have a rhythm. Yet, and the same thing I think applies in Patrick's work in the Oxygen Advantage. So if someone opens the Oxygen Advantage book, he will see or she will see that Patrick gives 5 characteristics of good quality of breath, which is light, nasal, diaphragmatic, rhythmic, and silent. And,
Yes.
And this is very similar to what I would say that we are achieving with Viloma, Anuloma, Nadi Sodhana, Samavriti, Visamavriti. Or if you see all of these things, all of these techniques, especially as they build up, right? You know, I give an example, you know, forget all the Sanskrit names that I mentioned. Box breathing, you know, I think few people are not familiar with box breathing. And in case there are some in the audience, it's the breathing technique where each phase of a breathing cycle lasts the same duration. So we can have a box breathing technique that lasts 1 second in, 1 second pause, 1 second out, 1 second pause. By the way, something that I didn't know until recently, and I only came across earlier this week as I'm doing some research, is that I think it's called tactical approach or something like that. There is an initial to that of box breathing of 4 seconds, and it's used by Naval SEALs in the US to help them deal with stress. They have also another version where they still go with 4 seconds and it's just in and out without any pauses. But the point here is that this can be built up to an 8 seconds and 10 seconds of its length. And isn't that a very slow breathing technique? I would argue that potentially we can come into hypercapnia, and that's something.
I agree.
Yeah, and I mean, for someone that is really understands how to use, how to get into hypoxia potentially. But hypoxia and hypercapnia are the 2 pillars of breathwork, and this is what it's all about in Oxygen Advantage.
And by the way, just for people listening, that means high carbon dioxide and low oxygen. Hypoxic, low oxygen, hypercapnic, high carbon dioxide.
Absolutely. Yeah. Sorry for that. My intention is not to throw terms here, but so this is what I observed when I completed my course with Patrick in 2017, that there is a massive overlap, and this is what I think that it is worth keeping in mind, and potentially if we were to learn, if we have people in the audience that are yoga practitioners, I would say if there is something to take away from this is that, yes, there is an overlap, but at the same time, there is a lot lost in the process of just following sequences without understanding the purpose. And I'm saying that why? Because one thing that I have observed a lot is that in yoga breathing techniques, there is little mention about the volume of the breath. And I would say that this is one of the big aha moments when people start reading Patrick's work, that it's not just the length of the breath that is important, but it's also the volume. So if we were to take into consideration everything that we said until now, that potentially pranayama or other breathing techniques have the goal to slow our breathing down, to help us take fewer breaths per minute. I think that's something that a lot of people would resonate with. Then they need to start paying attention into how much air they're taking in. And in contrast with what you mentioned earlier, that a lot of people aim for big breaths, they need to start shifting their mindset and do the reverse.
Yeah, 100%. And I have been in countless yoga classes where the instructor, and a very, very talented, very experienced instructor, will say, take a big breath. Everybody take a big breath. And knowing what I know now from the science and the physiology of the oxygen advantage, it makes so much more sense that by minimizing your breathing, by making your breathing effortless, your balance will improve, your energy will be much more efficient, and you will get all the more out of that yoga class, rather than creating this sort of overstimulated experience that it's not meant to be. Do you agree with that?
I think you're 100% right. I think the big breaths are like it's like one of these myths that have been passed down probably from generation to generation.
Absolutely.
That it is good for us, it helps us oxygenate our body, it helps us calm us down, while in reality we're nothing more than mimicking a dysfunctional breathing pattern.
And a stressful breathing pattern at that.
And a stressful breathing pattern.
Yeah, now the question everyone will now bring up, and everyone is probably thinking in their minds, is what about Wim Hof? That's always what people, but Wim Hof is a big breath. And I said, yes, but breath work is not just to calm yourself down. And Wim Hof can be very relaxing, but there are up regulators and down regulators. And I say Wim Hof is a stressor, and you could not breathe like Wim Hof all day, every day, because it would be incredibly dysfunctional. It's like exercise. It's good in very small doses. But I think the thing that I really got from your talk as well is the interest in not actually, yes, how you're breathing in the yoga class, nasal, invisible, ideal, but actually, how are you breathing the other 23 hours of the day? That was a real key takeaway for me from your talk, because yoga as well promotes itself, real authentic yoga, as a lifestyle, the eightfold path, being self-observant, holding good values, and really priding yourself of being someone that is of health. And so I think it matches it quite well. Is that something as well you discovered with the oxygen advantage?
For sure.
Not just the practice of breathing, but breathing optimally as a lifestyle.
100%, Georgie. I think that if one registers what the most beneficial breathing is for him or her at the specific such situation, then they will do it not during the yoga class, they will do it throughout the day. And for the majority of the time, I don't think we need to, as you said, hyperventilate. For the majority of the time, we don't need to hold our breath. For the majority of the time, we need to keep it. Actually, here I think it is, I don't know how much you want to go into this, but here we want to bring back the idea of how can we define optimal breathing? And really, if you look at any physiology book, respiratory physiology book, we will very quickly get the definition that the breathing should be matching our metabolic demands. So while someone going running will naturally increase their breathing volume, the goal, of course, is to just match the increase of metabolic demands and not surpass them. The same thing has to be done the rest of the day. Now that I'm sitting with you, why does my body need more airing? If I end up breathing in a more profound way, in a more vigorous way, then I'm obviously moving towards a hyperventilation. If I'm reducing my volume below that, then I'm moving to hypoventilation. And we need to know why we're doing when we're doing what.
Yeah, what just came into my mind then, actually, and I'm interested in your opinion on this as a teacher and an instructor. We often see this sort of my horse is bigger than your horse, especially with the rise of social media in yoga. Who can be the best human pretzel, right? And force themselves into these crazy positions that perhaps actually they're not ready for, and is not actually going to serve them. It could actually cause them harm, which is when, you should never be injured from a yoga class, but that is the only time you will be, is if you try and force yourself into something you're not ready for out of ego. Is that something you see a lot in your teachings? People, similarly to how people are breathing in excess of their metabolic requirements, on the other end, are they trying to force and push themselves in yoga rather than just letting it happen, letting the journey happen?
Yeah, I mean, my teaching has shifted, especially over the last 2 years, more into more private setup. So I don't see so much groups, or I don't see a lot of. Yeah, I'm not exposed to too many students these days. But I think this is something that naturally a lot of people will have. They will be forcing themselves into doing more. I think the more is better is a concept that is very prevalent in our society overall. And of course, yoga is not is equally susceptible to this pattern, because that's how people like to live their life.
Yeah.
That's it. I think it depends on the personality. I think there is a fine. I think there is a fine balance that people need to develop towards pushing themselves and towards backing off and understanding when they should do what. I think some personalities will have a tendency to always push more than they have to. Some personalities will always be backing off and be afraid to challenge themselves. It can happen with breathing, it can happen with asanas, it can happen with, I think, everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Right to the point where, even you can try and study too much. You can try and read too many books and at one time, and then actually you achieve nothing. And I think everything comes back to the same principle as the breath. It should never be pushed. It should never be forced. It should always be in this flow, like you said, in rhythm, everything. And actually, I think that's a wonderful principle to take, not just into yoga, but into everyday life. Yeah, completely. How has the Oxygen Advantage elevated you in your teachings? I know you told a story about how you did teach some classes or workshops in yoga with people taping the mouth to breathe just through the nose, and they had some quite profound experiences, right?
It was very pivotal for me when I did the Oxygen Advantage course. And it is safe to say that I went from shying away from teaching much breathing in my classes. So I went from a teacher that was barely speaking about the breath in his classes to someone that was not necessarily giving a lot of pranayama or a lot of breathing cues, but definitely got a much more clear and confident way of guiding my students, and guiding my students also based on their experience, which I think is something that we also need to consider, because obviously the way that an experienced practitioner breathes and someone that is like more of unfit or stiff will probably not be able to match the same standards. So I straight away started delivering this information into my classes. I was very eager to teach workshops. So in the following few years, 3-4 years, I've taught plenty of workshops. And in these workshops, I think it is where I got the opportunity, plus the classes, to really test and prove to my students that things that they can make a difference in terms of how they feel, in terms of their yoga practice, and so on. And there are many elements. I just want to make sure that it is not just about light breathing. And this is what gave birth to the Breathing for Yoga course that I'm now teaching with Patrick, that there is also a lot of other things such as breath holds, which are also, I find, a lot of the times feared by yoga teachers, and they can equally be extremely powerful and extremely useful, both for biomechanical and also for biochemical reasons in a yoga class. So yes, there was a massive impact that Patrick had in my yoga teaching, and I consider him for that reason the most influential mentor I had in breathing because of that reason.
Wow. And when you ask people in your class, in your yoga class, to tape their mouth and do an entire yoga class, what kind of feedback did you get? What were people saying afterwards that they experienced?
Sure. So mostly there would be, I would ask this primarily in workshops that were focused the focus would be breathing. So they were probably, the crowd would be probably a little bit more open to let's say experiment. There's nothing experimental about it, but in their eyes potentially there was.
Gotcha.
And the feedback was that they were most of the times, if not all of the times, very pleasantly surprised that they were feeling more centered, they were feeling more calm, they were feeling more able to even follow the practice that we were doing on the day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I from the few workshops I've now taught to a couple of yoga teachers, they've all found the same thing. And actually, I think something really magical happens when people are breathing together in unison with the asana. Now, of course, the yoga teacher will always say, breathe in as you lift arms up, breathe out as you come down into the forward fold, etc., coming through all of the asanas and sun salutations and everything. But a lot of people forget about the rhythm of the breath because they're too busy trying to figure out what they're doing with their bodies. But when people can breathe in unison, this collective coherence that happens is so incredibly powerful, I think. And really, there's some wonderful videos out there actually of people doing very repetitive practices like the Ashtanga practice that is the same every time, especially like the Mysore, etc., where everyone is breathing in complete unison, so much so that it sounds like one breath. The entire room is as if just one person is breathing. And I don't think I've seen anything more beautiful than people just moving as one. And I don't know, I can't articulate what that is. But I think I almost see that, and I wonder your opinion on it, in us coming back to our ancient roots of not just doing body beautiful asanas, but breathing together, uniting together, moving together, regardless of how high you can lift your leg or which variation of the pose you can do, that you're actually part of a universal thing.
Sure. So the breathing together is something that I have noticed myself, and I think in workshops, although I have noticed it myself when I was teaching workshops, I cannot say that I have experienced it myself when I was breathing in groups, but maybe I have, I'm not sure. I'm also a person that practices a lot of the times on my own, and I'm not like too much into the collective practices. But I think there might be something into it which I don't know. People seem to be resonating differently with the practice if they are like breathing at the same time. At the same time, I want to mention that I think this is also something that I think can potentially work against the individual's how can I call it, biochemical, biomechanical.
Yeah, because it's your own metabolic requirements.
Practice. Yeah, and that's why I'm a little bit like I have taught myself Ashtanga in the past. I used to practice for some time, and I'm picking Ashtanga, but because you mentioned, but Bikram is no different. It's like a set sequence.
26 postures.
Out, at a specific time. But if we are to take, as you know very well, two individuals with very different tolerance, respiratory tolerance. Let's keep it very broad. Without getting too technical. Someone that is like, a little bit, let's call him someone dysfunctional breather, and someone that is very good breather, like have a free diver. This sequence, would we expect to have the same effect if they are both having to breathe in and out at the same time?
No.
So this is something that we potentially need to consider as great as it may look and feel to breathe in the groups, and a lot of people will be able to follow along, but there will be individuals that they will need to modify, and ultimately I think they would be better off following their own breathing pattern.
Completely. Yeah, no, that's an incredible point there, actually. I'm really glad you raised that. And I think like in things like when I said I've seen a video, I'm talking about an incredibly advanced group of practitioners that have taken years to optimize their habitual breathing patterns, to learn, you know, really functional breathing so that they can breathe comfortably at this slower guided respiratory rate. Of course, it depends where you're starting from, because everything we're experiencing impacts our breathing. The environment, stresses, internal or external. And so you're so right. It really depends where you're starting from. The businessman that has had the craziest stressful day at work might not be able to slow his breathing down straight away, whereas, you know, perhaps someone who's had a really peaceful, slow day and they're feeling very zen could go straight into it. But you're so right in terms of the hyper personalization. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I'm really interested as well. I remember you advising the way to calm down from a raising of the breath, say when we're in a complicated posture or a strong posture that causes the heart rate to increase and the breathing rate to increase. I remember you advising to actually come to more of a hypercapnic place where you are doing reduced breathing in order to bring yourself down quicker. I completely agree with this, but I wanted to hear it from your end as to why, because you explain it so beautifully.
Sure. So first off, I think we need to appreciate that it's very easy in a yoga class for someone to end up hyperventilating.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
The reasons are multiple, and the one that I want to bring up for the crowd, I don't want to go into details because this will digress us from a conversation, but it's when we are performing asanas, the respiratory function at the very least on a biomechanical level is compromised. So even if I'm in a side flexion, of course, one side of my lungs is under pressure. Likewise, if I'm doing pretty much any spine articulation. So if someone is breathing heavier during a yoga class and he or she is not even when running or even cycling, it's not going to be surprising. Now, let's say that someone finds himself or herself in that state. What can be done? And there are a few different techniques, and one of them is to reduce the volume of air that they are taking in and out. Now, this, of course, will be in contrast to what their bodies will signal them to do. Their body, if they are out of air, their body will signal bigger breaths in and out. So that we recover this oxygen that we feel we're missing. But but the reality is that the oxygen is not really missing. The oxygen is there, the person cannot access it. And by reducing the volume of air, without wanting to get into the technicalities on why, they will be able to access the available oxygen that is still available in abundance circulating in their bloodstream.
Yeah, would you say that also comes with promoting, it's difficult to say to relax into the pose that is a really strong pose, but I suppose it is, can you just have the intention to make that pose that you perceive as difficult, to bring an ease to it, just so you're not working through tension, because surely when the body tenses up, that's going to induce more hyperventilation.
Correct. Yes, I mean there is 100%. So there is this double, and I don't want to say that this applies for every pose, but let's be very specific in the scenario that you're describing, Georgie. So someone is like performing a pose that, for the sake of simplicity, involves primarily flexibility.
Yeah.
If they are tense because they are very tight and their nervous system kicks in and it kind of locks the muscle, if they manage to relax, and they can relax by even going a little bit less deep into the pose, they will reduce the amount of carbon dioxide they are producing. They will be able to recover their breath. They will breathe more regularly. The other way around, of course, will happen as well. They will slow down their breath. They will breathe less air. And as a result, they will relax. As a result, they will be able to go deeper into the pose. Mm-hmm. So it's quite clear for people to see that the synergies between asanas and pranayama, which is big part of what we are covering in this Breathing for Yoga course, is really immense. And it goes both ways. It's not just a matter of working with the breath to help the asanas, it's also using asanas to support better breathing.
Absolutely. And could you explain a little bit more, sort of as we come to round up, to what entails, what is within the Breathing for Yoga course in the Oxygen Advantage? Because this is new, of course, and something, you know, I personally think if anyone's listening that is a yoga teacher, it should be the first thing you're looking for, because purely it will bring the authenticity back to any practice. But I'd love you to explain what that course entails. That's what I was trying to say before. There we go.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So it is, we are looking at into a yoga practice from 4 different lenses. Not everybody practices the same style of yoga. Not everybody practices yoga for the same reasons. So we have 4 different lenses. And the first lens is yoga for all levels. It's basically, we are looking at how yoga and breathing, it's always about yoga and breathing, how they mix together. And this is for all levels. And this, I think, is probably the main component of the course. I'll speak in a second about what we cover there. And then we have a vinyasa approach, and then we have like yoga for balance and concentration, and finally yin, restorative myofascial release type of approach.
Yeah.
So within these 4 approaches to yoga, and we look at first of all how we can apply the functional breathing into the practice. It's very different. We cannot expect to breathe in the same way during a vinyasa class and during a restorative class or a balance class. And so this is number 1. Number 2 is we look at the biomechanics, and we look at the biomechanics in 3 different lenses. So a lot of people, when they think about respiratory biomechanics, they think about the respiratory tract, and that's valid. That's one. We have obviously the lungs and the diaphragm, which is very important. But there are 2 more ways that we look at that. And the one is all the muscles that support the respiratory tract. We have a lot of muscles that support the rib cage, and they attach to the diaphragm, that yoga is absolutely fantastic at addressing. Everybody that has been to a yoga class has done warriors, has done forward bends like Uttanasana and so on, that will address muscles that help breathing function. And the last one is we look at the abdominals. As again, I think it's quite cool. People know the diaphragm is part of the postural system, is part of the abdominal system. And for that reason, the abdominals are often referred to as secondary respiratory muscles. There are different manipulations of the abdominals, ways of manipulating the abdominals that can improve the way one breathes. So this is in a nutshell, but then we look at breathing through hot yoga, and so we go into specific scenarios, but then these are the main broad areas that we cover.
Absolutely. So it's practical implementations and integrations, which
Absolutely.
I love. There's so many courses of sort of like, so this is why, here's the in-depth science, and then you walk away from that course and kind of go, how do I apply this? And then there's a whole nother course that you have to pay a whole load more money for. And it's, you know, so to have an applicable in-depth course, I think it's genius and so necessary in an overstimulated, over-adrenalized world that we're living in, where people need yoga and people need breath work, and it needs to be normalized. It doesn't need to be something that's reserved for yogis only. There's no such thing. It's, you know.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, absolutely. Very practical. There is lots of, apart from the online, the sessions that are live, there is, I don't know how many hours of material that are recorded and their participants have access to.
Yeah, and they also get access to Patrick's online content as well, don't they? His course of the fundamentals of the Oxygen Advantage. Yeah, which is fantastic. Yeah. Okay, final question to finish up, because it just popped into my mind very quickly, because I don't want to take too much of your time. I love a mantra and chanting in terms of the connection between the nasal nitric oxide and humming and opening up, expanding airways, and the ancient practice of mantra and the om and so many beautiful things. I think there's such an East meets West with all of that, that just shows why it survived for so many hundreds of thousands of years, because of the joyful effect it has on people. Is it something that you have noticed in teaching?
Yeah. I think again, these are practices that, as you said, have survived a long time, and it is because they do have an effect, and people feel different. And if I don't know if there are people that they don't, they have not practiced yoga in the audience, but they will be surprised about what they will enjoy after all. A lot of people start with yoga just to get more flexible. They end up enjoying things that they thought they don't want at all, such as oming and chanting. So, I think these are things that people will potentially find pleasure without expecting sometimes.
Absolutely. And it's true to set the intention to go into any course with an open mind, so that you can absorb, and a childlike curiosity, so you can absorb as much as possible. Anastasis, where do people find your course? How can people find the Oxygen Advantage Yoga
The
course?
Oxygen Advantage course, the best way is to find it at the Oxygen Advantage website. I mean, I have a link on my website as well. Yeah. And it is, breathing for yoga, and it runs a few times. I don't know when this podcast will go out, but we are having one starting in the 1st of November, the last for the year. Yeah. But I believe that there will be more in the new year.
Yeah, this podcast will go out really, really quick. So we're in mid-October, because anyone could be listening at any time. Who knows? People could be listening 50 years from now. But October 21st. Yeah, October 21st, 2021. So this will be going out in the next few days on Monday, this episode. So it'll be in time for people to really get to know and sign up for. I hope there's a few places left, hopefully, for people to sign up for the course. And I'll make sure your personal website and Instagram is in the show notes, so I'm sure if people have any questions about it, they can contact you, right?
100%.
Amazing. Anastasis, it's been glorious as per. You have a lot of wisdom, and it's just wonderful to how simply you make it all sound is wonderful. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Georgie. It was a pleasure to speak to you.
Absolutely.